Chapter 458, Hamel 1. Is it really okay? Anise stuttered while grasping Eugenie's hand. She seemed to be nervous, which was rather uncharacteristic of her. You might be acting on a moment's impulse, driven solely by emotion. Hamel, if that's the case, please reconsider. You will surely regret it later, she continued. Anise took on a serious expression as she earnestly voiced her concerns. Sienna stood beside her, wondering what expression she should wear. Sienna thought there was reason in Anise's words. After all, Eugene had quite an extensive history of acting unbefitting with his identity. She heard that Eugene even tried acting his age during childhood to avoid suspicion. Whether he had intentionally avoided mastering the toilet as an infant was uncertain, but it was clear that he lived like a child during his youth. It wasn't limited to his childhood either. Eugene had a few, no, quite many embarrassing moments, even when he was old enough not to behave childishly. As Anise said, acting impulsively would surely lead him to regret later. Finally, Sienna chimed in with her opinion. Eugene made his own decision, right? It's not our place to intervene. The regret was something Eugene had to bear, right? It was solely his. Whether he might regret making a hasty decision or feel embarrassed enough to wish for death later, all of that was for Eugene to deal with. Sienna had nothing to bear or lose in this decision. On the contrary, she stood to gain more. I'm acting on impulse and it's a spur-of-the-moment decision, Eugene admitted with a frown. Anise, like you said, I will definitely regret it. It won't even take that long. I'll probably start regretting it in just a few hours from now. Then Anise started. Still, I won't change my mind, Eugene declared without letting her finish. The Death Knight knew he was a fake and wasn't Hamel. It was highly probable that the Death Knight knew that Eugene was Hamel's reincarnation. Otherwise, there would have been no reason for him to hide his face and cause a disturbance at Black Lion Castle. If there had been many deaths, Eugene might have suspected Amelia Merwin was behind the attack. The Death Knight could have been forced to kill regardless of his own will if it had been a command from Amelia. But there were no deaths. He hadn't killed anyone. It was unlikely Amelia Merwin would issue such an order. He provoked me but also showed consideration for me, admitted Eugene. And he found it absolutely infuriating. Ultimately, he came here and caused trouble because of me. It's a very, very frustrating situation, isn't it? The Patriarch, Lady Carmen, and the others, even Ivatar and his warriors, must feel unjustified and frustrated. That guy suddenly showed up, beat them up, and left. They don't even know who he is, continued Eugene. Anise and Sienna listened to Eugenie's explanation without a word. The Patriarch and Lady Carmen said it's not my fault, but that's because they don't know the whole story. Let's be frank. How is it not my fault? He came here and caused a ruckus because of me. Luckily, no one died, but it doesn't lessen my responsibility. As Eugene continued, Anise's expression changed. She no longer tried to persuade Eugene. She realized there was no reason to. It was true that he was acting impulsively and emotionally. However, the emotions driving Eugene were anything but trivial. And that bastard was practically oozing the power of destruction. Now I can't even make excuses about the Moonlight Sword, Eugene added. Eugene had wielded the Moonlight Sword in the battle against the Demon King of Fury. Those who fought alongside him, including Carmen and the others, couldn't help but question the sword. What was this sword that emitted an ominous light and even cut through the Demon King's dark power? Eugene had been left with no choice but to lie that it was an artifact he found during his travels. Now that excuse was no longer viable. Besides, it seemed necessary for him to reveal the truth in consideration of the future. The idea of having to make up an excuse about the Moonlight Sword in every upcoming battle seemed utterly exhausting. He had to talk about the unique nature of the blood of the Lionhearts and regarding Vermouth in the future as well. That was why, right now, Eugene decided to reveal his biggest secret to the elders of the Lionheart family. That I am Hamel's reincarnation, Eugene stated inwardly. Only 2 people in the Lionheart family knew Eugene's secret. Genos Lionheart, the inheritor of Hamelstyle, and Seal Lionheart. No one else in the Lionheart family knew that Eugene was Hamel's reincarnation. Today a few more would find out the truth. He had no intention of revealing it to the entire family, just to the clan elder, Klein, as well as the other seniors of the family. Sienna glanced at Eugene's face from the corner of her eye. His serious expression and the weight of his words made Sienna feel just a bit, ashamed of herself. Bender. Should she stop Eugene from revealing his secret? There was no reason to. As she thought earlier, there was nothing for Sienna to risk or lose in Eugene's decision to reveal his identity. In fact, she had much to gain. She wouldn't have to consider the Lionheart family's opinion anymore. When Sienna had been in the Lionheart family mansion, she had always been wary of how she was perceived by the family members. She wasn't sure if this was the case with other people as well, but she definitely worried about the family's opinion of her. A centuries-old wizard taking on a barely 20-year-old sprightly young man as her apprentice and then becoming romantically involved with him would definitely be seen as inappropriate. She couldn't help but be wary of her surroundings. To make matters worse, Eugene was the star of the Lionheart family as well as the hero. He drew the attention of everyone on the continent. In addition, the Lionheart family's prestige was second to none. She sought Ancilla's cooperation regarding this issue at the cost of her dignity, but it did not resolve all the problems. But what if Eugene revealed his true identity as Hamel's reincarnation? For now, he seemed intent on revealing the truth to only a few key figures in the family, but that was enough to satisfy Sienna. Eventually, she could openly pursue a formal relationship and marriage with Eugene without worrying about the opinions of the patriarch or his father. A formal relationship? Wait, aren't we already in one? A sudden question popped into her mind, leaving Sienna confused. But in Eugene's current state, she couldn't dare to ask. Seal had already been silent for a while. Her lips were tightly sealed but occasionally twitched at the corners. Like Sienna, she too found it difficult to intervene in the conversation. If it becomes known that Eugene is Hamel's reincarnation. Seal gulped nervously at this thought. This revelation would significantly ease her efforts to convince her parents. Of course, even if Eugene didn't intend it that way, it was something to be tackled gradually after everything else was settled. Seal wasn't in a hurry. Opening the door, Eugene entered the room. Waiting at the round table of the Black Lion Castle were 8 people. Klein, Carmen, Gilead, Ancilla, Guion, Sen, Gerhard, and Genos. What brings us here? Gilead asked. He appeared perplexed but had a rough idea of why they were called. He, along with everyone else, assumed it was to discuss the assailant of the Black Lion Castle. It was crucial for them to confirm the identity of the attacker. Hence, despite their busy schedules, everyone had promptly gathered at the round table following the summons. Is there a reason for me to know as well? Gerhard wondered why he was summoned. He had answered the call with the soldiers of the family, but Gerhard wasn't a warrior. Even if they had identified the assailant, there was absolutely no reason for Gerhard to don his armor and weapons. Of course, that didn't mean he was without any roles. Even until now, Gerhard had been helping Ancilla as she personally looked after the injured. On the other hand, Ancilla felt a strong sense of responsibility as the mistress of the Lionheart family. I must know, she thought as she stared at Eugene with a serious expression. Although she doubted it would come to that, if need be, and if Eugene asked for it, she was ready to mobilize not just the Imperial Army under her own family, the Canis County's control, but also all the connections of the Imperial social circle she had formed until now. There's something important I need to tell you, Eugene began as Sienna, Seal, and lastly Christina entered the room. Though in a similar position to Anise, Christina also held great anticipation for Eugene's confession. She stared intently with her hands clasped in front of her chest and eyes full of faith. Is this about the enemy? Carmen mumbled. She was still bandaged even after the treatment. Eugene took a deep breath before speaking. I have a secret, he declared. The word, secret, elicited an immediate response from Genos. His eyes widened in shock at Eugene. Could it be? Right now? Here? Eugene nodded slightly, acknowledging his astonishment. I am. Suddenly, Eugene was struck with fear. Voicing this truth now meant there was no going back to how things were. He feared losing the relationships he had as a son, foster child, and brother. Even so, what had happened. Moreover, similar incidents might take place in the future as well. They were becoming tangled in the problems he was causing, not as Eugene Lionheart but as the reincarnation of Hamel Dynas. It was about family. He wasn't sure how everyone would react, but Eugene's resolve remained unchanged. Even if returning to the past was no longer possible, Eugene was the same in the past, now, and in the future. Whether he was the reincarnation of the god of war, Agaroth, or Hamel, he was simply himself in this moment, in this place. The enemy was a death knight forged from his corpse. It was a consciousness crafted from his residual memories. There had been numerous opportunities for Eugene to slay it, and he had done so as well. In fact, he had thought it had been vanquished. But he had failed to kill it. The Death Knight had survived, committed these atrocities, and then vanished. Its disappearance signified its survival. It might appear once more to wreak further havoc. Eugene was uncertain of what it might do next, given its existence stemmed from him. This remained true, even though Eugene had not directly contributed to its birth. Even so, Eugene thought, firming his resolve. Eugene's eyes settled calmly and the atmosphere surrounding him shifted. Everyone silently awaited Eugene's following words. "I am the reincarnation of Hamel." There was no immediate response. But it wasn't that there was no reaction. Everyone's eyes went wide with shock as they gazed at Eugene. Was it a joke or a prank? No one entertained such thoughts. Making such an absurd joke would be completely out of place. It was unthinkable. A heavy silence settled in the room. Gerhard's mouth hung agape as he stared at Eugene. The reincarnation of Hamel. Gerhard could immediately assume who Eugene was referring to. Hamel was the comrade of the great Vermouth, the progenitor of the Lionheart family. The stupid Hamel. Ah! Gerhard gasped as he could suddenly connect the dots after hearing his son's sudden confession. He remembered that Eugenie's cries were few ever since he was a baby. He cried occasionally, but even that seemed different from a normal infant's cries. At the time, it seemed almost as if, although unthinkable, that he was crying deliberately. His development in speech and walking had been unbelievably swift. At the time it seemed strange, but it was quickly accepted. After all, it wasn't long after he started walking that he was seen wielding a small stick like a sword. He was a prodigy. That was what Gerhard had thought. This fact had been enough for Gerhard to make sense of most of the strange things about his young son. Indeed, he turned out to be a prodigy. His son had been the only one from the collateral lines to win the bloodline continuation ceremony. He had even become the adopted child of the main family. He was permitted to inherit the white flame formula, and he continued to develop by learning magic and even proceeded to gain the recognition of the Holy Sword. He had thought his son to be a genius. However, he was now claiming himself to be the reincarnation of a hero from 300 years ago. It was unbelievable yet undeniably true. Gerhard finally managed to close his gaping mouth. He placed his hand over his fluttering heart while trying to steady his breath. The shock and confusion were not Gerhard's alone. Everyone except Genos felt both extreme astonishment and turmoil. Yet not a single soul posed another question to Eugene. No one scoffed at his seemingly nonsensical words. Even a moment's contemplation was enough to accept the truth in Eugene's statement. Gilead and Scylla, Guion, and Cyan, the members of the main family, had observed Eugene since he was 13. In particular, Guion vividly remembered the moment Eugene first entered the Lionheart family's ley line. He had instantly felt and manipulated mana. Such talent couldn't merely be chalked up to genius. Guion, too, had been lauded as a prodigy since his youth. But to be honest, he had not wanted to think of Eugene's abilities as just mere genius. That statement. Gilead stuttered out his words. It was unbelievable yet undeniable. Gilead tried to calm his jumbled thoughts and emotions as he attempted to pose a question. But Gerhard abruptly raised his hand and interrupted Gilead's words. "Family head. Let me speak first." Gerhard's voice was uncharacteristically firm. Gilead flinched and stepped back. "Very well," he answered. It was only right that Gerhard Lionheart should be the first to converse with Eugene. He deserved that right more than anyone else in the world. Gerhard took several deep breaths and looked straight at Eugene. "Why are you revealing this secret now?" Gerhard asked. His voice was filled with an inevitable tremor. Even his manner of speaking had changed. "Surely you didn't just remember this truth. You aren't suggesting that, are you?" "Until now, I saw no need to speak of it," Eugene replied with a bitter smile as he gazed back at Gerhard. "Why did you think there was no need to speak of it?" inquired Gerhard. "Because whether I am the reincarnation of someone or not, you are still my father," replied Eugene. Gerhard's eyes quivered. "To be honest, it was hard to see you as my father when I was young. Back then it hadn't been long since I reincarnated. But no matter what I thought, you were always my father and you treated me as your son," confessed Eugene. Gerhard listened quietly as his chest filled with emotion. "Until now and in the future too. Even if you can no longer consider me your son, I will still think of you as my father, said Eugene. Gerhard's eyes welled up as he struggled to hold back the tears. He staggered forward and opened his arms wide. He embraced Eugene. I am the father of a hero, Gerhard said, stifling a sob. After patting his back a few times, Gerhard released his son. He staggered back. His legs gave way and he collapsed into a chair. It's the same for Patriarch Lady Ancilla and Sir Guillaume, said Eugene, looking at the trio. Why would we think any differently? It was a hard truth. Hamel. The stupid Hamel. The comrade of the progenitor, the great Vermouth. The friend of the brave Molin, the founding king of Roer. Thinking back to the night march, Molin himself must have known the truth. By goodness! Ancilla uttered as she covered her mouth with her hands. She alternated her gaze between Sienna and Eugene, and at one point she met Sienna's gaze. Ancilla couldn't understand why Sienna was winking at her vigorously. Me? What about me? Sienna stammered. If Sir Gerhard is your father and the Patriarch and Lady Ancilla are the same, then what about me? Am I still part of this? Sienna felt a sense of unease growing within him as he looked at Eugene. Was he now to be told he wasn't a brother after all? He noticed Seal's expression in the background. Had she already known? Her lack of surprise suggested so. Why was Seal told before me? Sienna felt a pang of jealousy that his twin had known before him. You're the same too, said Eugene. Ugh. Sienna clutched his chest while gasping for breath. The same? What do you mean? He questioned. My brother, answered Eugene simply. Good heavens. Sienna plopped down into a chair while breathing heavily. Another short bout of silence followed this conversation. Klein had little to do with Eugene, but he had been included in the conversation. He cleared his throat. Ahem. I will keep this from the other elders. It must have been to save his face as the chief elder. Klein stroked his beard while glancing at Genos before saying, Genos. You must also. I have known for several years, confessed Genos, interrupting Klein. Klein's eyes widened at the response. Just then Carmen spoke up for the first time, reincarnation. The moment she raised her voice, all eyes turned to her. She was known as the most eccentric in the Lionheart family, yet clear about the distinction between public and private matters. If Carmen declared she couldn't treat Eugene the same as before, the mood would become awkward. The reincarnation of Hamel. She muttered. Yes. I had no intention of deceiving you, Lady Carmen. Eugene responded. The stupid black lion. Carmen muttered as if she hadn't heard him. Eugene's expression contorted. Chapter 459, Hamel, 2. After some time passed and the heightened emotions died down, Eugene explained the attack behind Black Lion Castle. Sienna had encountered the Death Knight in the Samar rainforest. He reacted in shock at the mention of the Death Knight. Wasn't that guy killed back then? Sir? Sienna asked. Why are you talking like that? Eugene responded. Ahem. I keep getting distracted. Sienna admitted, a bit embarrassed. If it bothers you so much, maybe we should stop calling each other brothers, Eugene suggested half-jokingly. That bastard. He was supposed to be dead, wasn't he? Sienna blurted out, then suddenly realized the presence of Ancilla and Gilead in the room. Gilead didn't seem too bothered, but Ancilla shot a sharp look at Sienna the moment he spoke, making him shrink back. His mother was once more fearsome than anyone else, and her nature was not lost on him. Death Knight. Those who hadn't been in the forest, basically everyone apart from Sienna, were unaware of this entity. Eugene had previously asked for secrecy regarding this matter to avoid chaos in the main family. But even when the soul inside was a fake, the body itself belonged to stupid Hamel. Revealing this to the main family would have only caused chaos, so keeping it a secret seemed a reasonable course of action to Sienna at the time. How could it be that the body of a great hero was desecrated and turned into a Death Knight? Furthermore, the Death Knight had turned into an existence close to a demon king and attacked Black Lion Castle. It was a shocking and difficult truth to accept. Perhaps in an era of war, but in these times of peace, undead crafted from human corpses were virtually non-existent. Ahem. Gilead cleared his throat while looking ahead. The identity of the assailant paled in comparison to the revelation of Eugene's true identity. Since the bloodline continuation ceremony, Gilead had thought the child exceptional, unbelievably talented, a gift from the heavens. Of course that was to be expected. Who could have imagined that Eugene was the reincarnation of the stupid Hamel? Arihem Eugene? Guillaume spoke up hesitantly. He gave the same bright smile as usual as he continued. I can understand that you are the reincarnation of Sir Hamel, but well, is it still okay for us to treat you the same as before? Eugene replied, I told you already. Apart from my reincarnation I am still the same as before. Right, you are still Eugene regardless of the reincarnation. Yeah, Guillaume replied nervously. He had asked once more, a bit redundantly because Ancilla and Klein still looked uneasy with the newfound truth. His brother, Gilead, on the other hand, would not be bothered much. In fact, he did not seem to be bothered by Eugene being a reincarnation of a great hero. The same held true for Guillaume. He had looked after Eugene ever since he was young. Of course, it could no longer be said that he looked after Eugene after learning of his true identity, but in any case he shared many memories and a strong bond with Eugene. Neither Gilead nor Guillaume cared much about Eugenie's true identity. It was similar for Carmen. She was unexpectedly strict and sensible yet accepted Eugene just as he was. On the other hand, it was harder for Klein to come to terms with the revelation. His expression was gruff, voice heavy, and as he glanced furtively at Eugene, a cold sweat ran down his spine. Eugene was the reincarnation of a hero and of the notoriously ill-tempered Hamel at that. Klein did not believe Eugene's demeanor thus far had been an act or a deception. But still, if it was that Hamel, a thought crossed his mind. Might he casually overturn all established relationships now that the truth was out? Such thoughts were inevitable, given that the Hamel of the fairy tales Klein read as a child was a character of extremely foul temperament. It was an unavoidable circumstance. It had been over 200 years since Sienna and Anise published those fairy tales. The curse-laden first editions could only be found in libraries like Akron. And over the centuries, the book underwent several revisions to fit the times. In particular, for renditions targeted at children, many portrayed Hamel as a bad-tempered fool, for the story to serve as a cautionary tale. It was aimed to educate children not to grow up like him. This is complex, Carmen murmured while stroking her chin. The stupid black lion. From the moment I started to walk and could pick up a book to read on my own, Eugene said, glaring at Sienna with a murderous look. Catching his gaze, Sienna casually turned her head and hummed to herself, pretending not to notice his gaze. I hated being called stupid Hamel, he said. Isn't judgment the right of posterity? Countered Carmen. It's not posterity's judgment. It's all because of this. Eugene was about to point at Sienna while shouting. However, he was suddenly silenced. Sienna's eyes sparkled like gems, and in an instant her magic sealed Eugene's mouth and restrained his movements. What's important now is not whether Hamel or Eugene is stupid, said Sienna. The ending of the fairy tale had remained the same through dozens of revisions. Hamel confessed his feelings to Sienna as he died. What if it became known that Sienna was the author? She didn't want to face the consequences. Indeed, Carmen nodded. I think the stupid black lion sounds quite noble. But Eugene, if you dislike it, I won't call you stupid. What I know of you is far from stupid. What kind of magic was this? Eugene marveled and panicked at the magic restraining him. When he first heard that Sienna was aiming to become the goddess of magic, he thought she might have finally lost her mind after 300 years. But it seems it wasn't just talk. The reincarnated black lion. That won't do either. Nor the returned black lion, since you don't want your reincarnation to be known. Carmen muttered. Eugene could just listen to her mumblings, unable to react. Then regrettably, Eugene, I shall simply call you the Black Lion, Carmen finally concluded. Eugene decided to stay quiet, not voicing his opinions. The nickname, Black Lion, might overlap with the Black Lion Knights, but honestly he didn't dislike the moniker. But still, while we can overlook it for now, I believe a fitting alias must eventually be discussed and bestowed upon you. For now, as Lady Sienna said, there are more pressing matters, said Carmen. Yes, Sienna agreed. The Death Knight, declared Carmen. Her expression immediately changed. She clenched her fists as she recalled the battle with the Death Knight. Even if he is a fake, the skills he used are Hamel's that were forged from his remnant memories. I too have sparred several times with Sir Genos and am well versed in those techniques. But he never once used those techniques, Genos interjected, his voice tinged with humiliation. Had he employed Hamel's style, I would have surely recognized it. He had no need to use them, or he deliberately refrained. Both, I suppose. The bastard dared to show me consideration, said Eugene. His lips twisted into a wry smile. And after committing such vile acts, Eugene finished. Carmen looked back and forth between Eugene and Genos. Genos had known about the reincarnation in advance. It was somewhat expected. Genos's lineage was the legitimate heir to the Hamel style. Carmen was curious about exactly when the relationship between the two blossomed, but didn't press for answers right then. She could always inquire later, slowly, step by step. His dark power was unsettling and ominous. There were other matters at hand. If the dark power mixed within him was that of destruction, then that unsettling and ominous force must have been it. But I have felt that dark power before, said Carmen. She couldn't let go of that nagging question. Eugene had said that the sword he wielded against the Demon King of Fury was an artifact he stumbled upon during his travels. She hadn't been completely convinced even then. The light emitted by the moonlight sword was too sinister. But it was undeniably lethal against the Demon King of Fury, and the one who wielded that light was a kinsman Carmen could trust and rely on in battle. That was why, despite her doubts, she hadn't probed further. Frankly, she had faith that Eugene, being who he was, would handle it well. But now that was no longer an option. I understand what you are wary of, Lady Carmen, Eugene said with a deep sigh. Carmen abruptly stood up in response to his words. Her eyes widened as she stared intently at Eugene. What's wrong? Asked Eugene. Lady Carmen, muttered Carmen. What is it? Inquired Eugene. Please address me once more, Carmen asked with an earnest face. Eugene found her gaze and expression awkward. But he complied with the request. It wasn't anything difficult. Lady Carmen, he called out. Ah. Carmen moaned and trembled with a strange thrill. It was none other than the great hero, the stupid Hamel, who was addressing her as such. Eugene couldn't quite grasp why Carmen seemed so satisfied as she sat down once more. Explaining it all would be tiresome, Eugene said, then cleared his throat as he rose from his seat. He felt Sienna and Christina's worried gazes. He gave a slight nod to assure them, then drew the moonlight sword from his cloak. This is Vermouth's. Eugene stopped abruptly. A minor irritation nagged at his mind. Just moments ago he had assured everyone that he remained Eugene Lionheart. He was unchanged from who he was. In other words, the people before him were still the elders of the clan, and Eugene, as always, would respect them as such. What then of Vermouth? When talking to those unaware of the circumstances, he had always referred to Vermouth with honorifics. But what about now? Does it bother anyone if I call Vermouth just Vermouth? Asked Eugene. No one quite knew how to respond to that, and naturally, all eyes turned to Gilead, the family head. Gilead felt a tinge of resentment under their gazes and gave an awkward smile. Eugene. You are also Sir Hamel, so feel free to address the founder comfortably, he said. Well, yes. I guess that's true. Even if it were bothersome or inappropriate, Eugene intended to keep calling Vermouth by his name. He continued while infusing mana into the moonlight sword. This sword was used by Vermouth 300 years ago, he explained. Whoosh. A pale, ominous moonlight wrapped around the blade. It's a bit different, Carmen observed the moonlight sword with surprise. The light she saw now and the one during their battle against the Demon King of Fury weren't entirely the same. If she had to compare, the light from the battle against the Demon King of Fury seemed closer to the Death Knight's dark power. It's because quite a bit of my power has been mixed with it, Eugene responded, then extinguished the light of the moonlight sword. Gilead had been gawping at the sword. He shook his head and spoke. There was no such sword in Lionheart's treasury. Suddenly he recalled a memory. The memory was of the day Eugene first entered the treasury. Gilead's eyes widened as he looked at the necklace Eugene was wearing. Could it be like your necklace? He asked. This necklace is indeed something Vermouth had hidden, but the moonlight sword was not from the treasury, responded Eugene. Though it strayed from his guess, Gilead appeared relieved. 10 years had passed, and it was reassuring for the patriarch to finally discover the origin of an unknown artifact. I've never heard of the moonlight sword, Klein murmured while tapping his temple. He became lost in thought. All the famed weapons used by Vermouth were stored in the treasury. But he had never heard of the moonlight sword. The name was completely alien to him. Vermouth intentionally hid the existence of this sword. He left no name of it anywhere, and the sword was hidden in Hamel's tomb, explained Eugene. The concealment of the Moonlight Sword's existence wasn't just Vermouth's doing. The fact that even the demons hadn't spread the name suggested the Demon King of Incarceration might have cooperated too. The Demon King collaborating with a hero a few years ago, such a notion would have been dismissed as ludicrous, but the current Eugene couldn't think that way anymore. Then how should he explain it? Eugene organized his thoughts as he sheathed the Moonlight Sword and placed it back into his cloak. The Moonlight Sword is a weapon of the Demon King of Destruction, he said. In that aspect, it was similar to the Annihilation Hammer or the Demon Spear, which were former weapons of the Demon Kings. But the notion that it was a weapon of the Demon King of Destruction caused everyone's expressions to harden. Amidst the silence, Eugene continued. He didn't know how Vermouth could wield the Moonlight Sword. But considering Vermouth's actions, the peculiar nature of the Moonlight Sword, and various unspoken truths, he could make a conjecture that Vermouth had a close connection with the Demon King of Destruction. It was possible that Vermouth might not even be human. What kind of nonsense? Guillaume burst out, his face pale as he staggered to his feet. The founder? The great Vermouth not human? It's preposterous. Sit down, Guillaume. Gilead too was pale, but unlike Guillaume, he didn't shout. He commanded in a low, cold voice. Guillaume hesitated before sitting down. And these unspeakable secrets are? Asked Gilead. There was the incident in Hamel's tomb where Vermouth attacked Sienna. Vermouth had issued a warning about the Nur. Eugene didn't want to disclose such things. Sienna felt the same. I'm telling you, I almost got killed by your founder with a gaping hole in my chest. It's not like Vermouth is a bad guy, but he was kind of off, you know. How could they say such things in front of Vermouth's descendants, especially given how serious they were right now? Sienna and Eugene quickly exchanged glances. An unspeakable secret is just that something that can't be revealed, said Sienna. Everyone nodded with heavy expressions. Well, the idea that Vermouth might not be human is just a conjecture. For now, I'm saying that our, Lionheart blood is special, that's all, Eugene said. Could it be, even Seal's demon eye? Ancilla asked while clutching her head. Eugene quickly observed her expression before continuing. Yes, well, it seems so. The Lionheart's handling relics of the Demon King. This Moonlight Sword included. The Sword of Destruction. Carmen murmured. If your words are true, then my body carries special blood. The blood of a Demon King. Not evil, though. Yes, exactly. Eugene seized upon Carmen's words, finding an opening in the challenging explanation. While Vermouth's true nature is unknown, and the Moonlight Sword is indeed the Sword of Destruction, he was not evil. In fact, he was more heroic than anyone. Just as I was not stupid. Eugene made sure to emphasize his last words. Vermouth made a pact with the Demon King of Incarceration to usher in an era of peace. He deceived everyone into believing he was dead and personally sealed the Demon King of Destruction. Even at this very moment, continued Eugene. Sealed. Carmen's eyes sparkled. Sealed? What do you mean by that? Gilead asked urgently. The Demon King of Destruction lies dormant in the depths of Revesta. There's a temple in the heart of Revesta. Vermouth is sealing him there. It's probably part of the pact he made with the Demon King of Incarceration, continued Eugene. Are you saying the founder is still alive? Genos shouted while jumping up from his seat. The great Vermouth was still alive and sealing the Demon King of Destruction. The news ignited a fire in everyone's eyes. Yes, Eugene affirmed with conviction. Aya! Carmen exclaimed while raising her hands in astonishment. The great Vermouth might not be human. The blood of Lionheart might be mixed with some demonic essence. It didn't matter. Carmen never felt an evil urge, not once in her life. The only sensation she felt from the Sword of Destruction was a nauseating ominousness. She had no doubt about her righteousness and was always ready to sacrifice herself for the Lionheart family and the world. If the founder is alive, sealing the Demon King of Destruction by himself, and if this era of peace is due to his sacrifice, I am a Lionheart first and then the head of the main family. I want to rescue the founder, Gilead declared resolutely. It was a tumultuous revelation. He found nothing easy to comprehend or accept. But if the founder was sacrificing himself for the world as his descendants who knew his legend and glory, they ought to act on his behalf. I don't know why Vermouth did what he did, Eugene said. but he reincarnated me. Ever since I first read the fairy tale and learned about the current world, I've had one constant thought. Over 20 years had passed. But Eugene's purpose had never changed from the time when he lived as Hamel. I will kill all the demon kings, he declared. Just as Hamel had desired, so did Eugene. Sienna, Anise, and Molin, they all wished for the same. And I will rescue Vermouth. Chapter 460. Hamel 3. Despite having different parents, Eugene and Sion had lived as brothers for 10 years. However, when Eugene first joined the family as an adopted child, Sion had many grievances. Ancilla repeatedly instructed Sion to get along with Eugene and to treat him as a true blood brother. The clan head, their father and uncle, were delighted to welcome a talent like Eugene into the main family. His twin sister Seal took a liking to Eugene from the start, albeit subtly, or rather quite openly. At 13, Sion found it difficult to accept this sudden addition to his family, this new brother. In particular, from a very young age, Sion had resolved to become the clan head for the sake of his mother, a concubine. As such, he couldn't help but feel discomfort by and jealous of Eugene, who was evidently extremely gifted, to the point of being called a prodigy. While Seal had never aspired to the position of clan head, the same didn't hold true for Sion. For him, Eugene was an unwelcome stone, no, a boulder disrupting his path. However, the initial displeasure of Eugene joining the family did not last even a month. Just as it had been for Seal, Sion too had no friends of his own age. Sion had been raised in a strict environment, receiving education at home. He was labeled as the concubine's son, and Ancilla had always been harsh. After being raised in such an environment, it couldn't be helped that Eugene caught his attention. Eugene never cared about others' opinions. Sion picked fights with Eugene a few times, and each time he was soundly defeated. Ironically, these beatings gradually opened Sion's heart. Sion was quiet as he recalled their past. 13 was a tender age. No matter how well educated one was, it was inevitable that one would behave childishly at such a young age. However, for Eugene, looking back, Eugene's maturity was remarkable, almost unbelievable. Sion often felt a wave of embarrassment when he reminisced about his childhood, especially his teenage years. Being the same age as him, Eugene too should have gone through adolescence. However, Eugene had never shown even traces of him going through a rebellious or an adolescent phase. Sion had thought it was because Eugene was just naturally mature. That was what he had thought. Ahem. As he reminisced, a smile crept onto Sion's lips. Though Eugene had always been mature for his age, there had been moments when he acted like a child, especially when talking about the heroes from 300 years ago. Most Lionhearts would say they admired the founder, the great Vermouth. Not me. I admire Sir Hamel. I've seen people who admire Sir Molin, but someone who admires Sir Hamel is a first. That was indeed true. Wizards typically admired the wise Sienna, priests the faithful Anise. And knights, most often, professed admiration for the great Vermouth. Occasionally, there were some oddballs or those who were all about brute force who admired the brave Molin. However, no one said they admired the stupid Hamel. Well, not absolutely no one, but it was still extremely rare. After all, Hamel was depicted in the fairy tale as truly foolish and lacking many admirable qualities. Of course, even if he lacked brains, was bad-tempered and was lucky, Hamel was said to be an excellent fighter. Moreover, he sacrificed himself for his companions in the end. With a bit of searching, one could find a few aspects of this hero worthy of admiration. However, the charm of the stupid Hamel was hard for a child to grasp. Admiring Hamel solely from fairy tales usually happened later in life, after growing older and rereading those tales. Some people would realize, Hamel was quite a decent character after all. That's not true. The Patriarch said he liked Sir Hamel. Stop lying. Why would I lie about the Patriarch? And hey, what's wrong with admiring Sir Hamel? Do you know how great he was? What do you know about Sir Hamel? I've read the fairy tale too. What's written in a fairy tale and actual history are different. You're too dense to have read anything but fairy tales, but I've read heroic tales of Hamel that aren't in those books. Then show me. I really want to, but sadly I can't right now. That book is at my house back in Jadal. The title? I can't remember. It was such an old book that it might not even have a title. Sion recalled their conversation from many years back. Even after asking Eugene several times, he never received the book, which was supposedly at Jadal. It wasn't just during their childhood either. He recalled similar occurrences the first time he saw the Death Knight in Samar Rainforest, when he saw the statue of Sir Hamel in the Kingdom of Roer, and several other times. Whenever he had the chance, Eugene was always exalting Hamel and going off about him. Pfft. Cyan couldn't hold in his laughter. So, all this time he was just glorifying himself without anyone knowing? He had been earnestly singing his own praises? The more Cyan thought about it, the harder it became to keep a straight face. Pfft. He tried to contain his laughter but couldn't help as giggles escaped through his quivering lips. Naturally, Eugene heard it. He held back. Now that the whole truth was out, he thought it natural for Cyan to laugh. It would be cruel to forbid laughter at such an obvious matter. But after hearing him chuckle repeatedly, Eugene couldn't help but think it would be fine to become a little cruel. Eugene acted on his impulse. He turned and approached Cyan. Cyan panicked as he attempted to change his expression and flee, but escaping from Eugene was an impossible task, even if he tried his best. In the end, Cyan didn't get far before Eugene caught him and gave him a swift kick on the shin. "Why are you laughing?" Why?" inquired Eugene. "I was just reminded of old times." Cyan stuttered. "Old times? What old memories? Why don't you tell me so I can laugh too?" Let's laugh together," pressed Eugene. Cyan clamped his mouth shut. If he answered truthfully to Eugene and admitted to laughing because of how Eugene used to talk about Hamel, it was entirely possible that the bad-tempered brat might even kill his brother. The conversation at the round table had concluded. Everyone was confused, but nonetheless they had to focus on sorting out the chaos in the castle. Ancilla didn't immediately understand why Sienna was trailing behind her and why Seal was closely following Sienna. But she was a woman of iron and ambition. She had entered the Lionheart family as a concubine and surpassed the legitimate wife in stature through her efforts. Even before giving birth to the twins, she had established her place in the family through her perceptiveness and awareness. Right now, Ancilla could sense a strong feeling of expectation in the eyes of Sienna and Seal. Surely not. Ancilla thought. Sienna had feelings for her student Eugene. Sienna had visited the mansion before. Although they only had tea, Sienna had started rambling as if she had been drinking alcohol. Ancilla could never forget that moment even if she wanted to. However, she was afraid to recall it. Anyway, Sienna had feelings for Eugene and had even sought Ancilla's permission. She had asked in advance because she was more conscious of others' opinions than one might expect. If Eugene had revealed his identity not just to a few within the Lionheart family but to the whole world, then Sienna would no longer need to worry about what others thought. With Eugene being Hamel's reincarnation, there's no issue in their relationship. At least that's how my husband and I see it. Ancilla organized her thoughts. Indeed, she had never thought of it as a problem before. Despite centuries of age difference, the wise Sienna joining the Lionheart family was an honor that outweighed the blockade of a mere few centuries of age difference. But now that's no longer something to worry about. So, does she want a more definite answer? Ancilla forced herself to try and understand. It was an action that couldn't be deemed wise by any means. But from what she had seen, Sienna had certain aspects that seemed too innocent for someone who had lived for 300 years. In truth, Ancilla wanted to live to see her grandchildren. Thinking of Eugene as a son was difficult, but she still regarded him as a close relative. She often imagined Eugene or Cyan having children. The prospect of looking after her grandchildren brought a happy smile to her face. Ancilla tightened her grip on the left hand that was holding Mare's hand. Hee. Mare was also happy to see Ancilla after so long. Ancilla was also a maternal figure, but the affection she gave was more mature than Sienna's or the saints. Rhaenyra felt similarly as she held onto Ancilla's other hand. She's like a grandmother. Rhaenyra didn't say it out loud. She had been reprimanded by Mare before. Lady Ancilla might get angry if you call her grandmother. So just call her Lady Ancilla. It was indeed the right approach. She wanted to see her grandchildren, but she wasn't ready to be called grandmother just yet. Ancilla stood at a complex crossroads in her life. Seal. What about Seal? Ancilla wondered next. She knew her daughter harbored special feelings for Eugene. She had thought of respecting and supporting those feelings. She had envisioned a future where Seal would be united with Eugene from the very beginning when Eugene was first adopted. The problem was that Eugene had no such intentions towards Seal. What could she do if the other party was unwilling? They're not siblings anymore. Yes. Eugene is Sir Hamel's reincarnation. Knowing this, Seal, you might have more to argue. Even though you were never siblings related by blood, knowing Eugene is a reincarnated being might give you a stronger ground to assert your feelings. So then why were the two following her so amiably now? Eugene respected Ancilla. If Ancilla arranged for something, he would participate even if reluctantly. Could it be that the two of them were hoping for that? Did they expect her to arrange an engagement? Surely not. She didn't know about Sienna, but would Seal really partake in such antics? No, she wouldn't. But could she be sure? In the past, Ancilla herself had felt a burning love for her husband. It was true that she desired the Lionheart name, but that wasn't the whole story. She had joined the household as a concubine during the stages of her prime, in her youth, against everyone's opposition. It had been a foolish act born of passionate love. It didn't matter whether they were a man or a woman. People truly turned foolish when they were engulfed in intense love. It was as Ancilla thought. Sienna was hoping that Ancilla would mention a possibility of an engagement. Seal wasn't necessarily expecting the same, but she wanted to keep Sienna in check. And if possible, she hoped her mother would side with her own daughter. They had both become fools indeed. Lady Sienna, may I request your assistance in restoring the forest that was ravaged in battle? Ancilla suddenly inquired. Yes. I was just there and the forest is hardly recognizable. The trees were shattered and the land upheaved, continued Ancilla. Sienna's eyes quivered. Probably half of that destruction was due to her magic. It may be difficult to immediately return it to a forest, but leaving it as is might lead to further damage like landslides or more trees falling. But with the magic of the wise Sienna, it can surely be restored quickly, suggested Ancilla. Yeah, all right. Sienna reluctantly answered. Seal, go with Lady Sienna and help out, said Ancilla. Yes, mother, Seal answered while quickly composing her expression. Her mother's voice was cold. Indulging personal desires in the midst of this chaos. Ancilla shook her head while clicking her tongue. Rhaenyra and Mare looked up at Ancilla with a confused expression, all the while holding her hands. Let's go to the dining hall. There will be many things you'll enjoy there, said Ancilla. The wounded had been treated and the morning was drawing near. But with the recent calamity, no one would be resting easily, even if their wounds were treated. The knights would be in the dining hall, soothing their stomachs with a meal. Sir Eugene, Christina called out. She approached Eugene as he was bullying Cyan. She gestured towards the priests of Euras in the distance and whispered. The papacy has contacted us again. They're inquiring about the preparations for the crusade. How should I respond? She asked. The Holy Empire had declared Eugene as the incarnate of light and hero. They had expressed their absolute support for Eugene. News of Black Lion Castle being attacked had reached the papacy, and it seemed the zealots were discussing a crusade. No need to muster the Holy Army. Just have the Blood Cross Knights and the Luminous Covenant on standby, responded Eugene. Understood. Christina nodded slightly. The Blood Cross Knights were the elite of the Paladins, and the Luminous Covenant were the elites of the Combat Priest. Both groups were armed with nearly fanatical faith and spirit. They called for martyrdom and they did not fear death. Moreover, if the Pope declared a crusade invoking the divine, most believers of Euras would join the Holy Army, even if they only had farming tools in hand. However, Christina and Anise had no desire to go that far. They did not want to mobilize the Holy Army unless the world was on the brink of absolute destruction. They were unsure why the Death Knight attacked Black Lion Castle. It had not been due to a command from Amelia. It was a decision made by the fake himself. It's a damned situation, but this attack, he was being considerate of me. He's trying to draw me out. That was what Eugene believed. He pondered what the Death Knight had been aiming for in carrying out this act and also what kind of personality was governing his actions. The fake held Hamel's memories. Even if he realized he was a fake, his personality was still derived from Hamel's memories. In other words, the imposter thought like Hamel and came to a conclusion based on his chain of thoughts. Eugene didn't want to think this way, but he had no choice but to consider it. What would be the reason? Why would I attack the castle for my sake? If the imposter was truly close to being Hamel, it would know what Eugene wanted through his actions so far. In truth, coming to such a conclusion didn't necessarily need one to think like Hamel. Eugene had been quite explicit in his desires. He had asked Melkith to attack the black wizards in Nahoma. He tried to draw out Amelia from her hiding. He made demons cross into Nahoma. He gave me a justification, Eugene realized. What Eugene intended was to force Amelia into a corner to make her prepare for war. But now there was no need for that. With the impostor attacking Black Lion Castle, he now had a pretext to raise an army and invade Nahoma. Instead of using Melkith to subtly provoke Nahoma, the allied forces could gather their full strength and crush them head-on. Damn bastard, Eugene muttered. The impostor had not only provided a justification. He had triggered Eugene's emotions. Humiliation. Rage. Eugene turned his head and looked down at the castle walls. Below he saw the warriors of Zoran gathering. He could see Ivatar in the distance. He could see Ivatar's back and his shoulders trembling. Even if other allied nations hesitated, Ivatar would mobilize all the warriors of Samar to join Eugene in the attack on Nahoma. I should go and calm them down, Eugene murmured while stepping onto the balustrade. Eugene. But before Eugene could jump, a loud voice echoed from the tower. He could see Gilead leaning out of the window. Gilead had gone to report the situation to Keel, but he had lost his composure and was calling out. Eugene looked up with surprise, then leaped high as his expression hardened. There was no need to ask what had happened. It was clearly some terrible news. Chapter 461, Hamel 4. Nahoma's capital, Horia, was surrounded and besieged by a gigantic centipede. That was the news that was confirmed from the Keel Palace. And indeed it was a massive centipede. People of this era had never seen such a creature and didn't know its true nature. But Eugene, Sienna, and Anise were aware of what it truly was. It's the Centipede Mountains. Eugene grimaced as he uttered the words. According to the dream Noir had shown him in the past in Shimuan, the Centipede Mountains were confined in the underground city of Ravesta. So why was something supposedly locked away in Ravesta suddenly in Horia? Helmuth's capital, Pandemonium, had been the realm of the Demon King of Incarceration since the ancient era of war. The Demon King of Incarceration had surrounded all his realms, including Pandemonium and the Red Plains with the Centipede Mountains. In other words, the Centipede Mountains belonged to the Demon King of Incarceration. Could it be that the Demon King of Incarceration was providing full support to Nahoma? Eugene frowned as he stared intently at the projected image. This grotesque and enormous demon differed from 300 years ago. During the era of war, the Centipede Mountains had disguised itself as an actual mountain range. After it wrapped around the entire realm, it had covered its surface with dirt and trees. Many warriors had advanced into the realm of the Demon King of Incarceration without knowing this truth. They had climbed the range only to be torn apart or poisoned by the wriggling centipede legs or devoured by the broods of centipedes. It took a long time for the world to realize that this wasn't a mountain range at all but a massive monster. After all, the size of the Centipede Mountains was beyond any ordinary comprehension. How was it possible that a single creature could envelop such a vast realm? Many died before they realized the mountain range itself was a creature. And until the Demon King of Incarceration opened the Centipede Mountains, his realm was considered an impregnable forbidden zone. What is he trying to do? Sienna muttered while glaring at the Centipede Mountains. At first she thought it was being used only as a barrier for the capital just like it had been 300 years ago. But that didn't seem to be the case as further news kept coming in. The Centipede Mountains had actually blockaded Horia. No communication could reach the city from outside. In addition, all the warp gates in Horia had been destroyed. Not just closed but completely obliterated. And before the warp gates were destroyed, most of the capital's citizens were expelled to nearby cities. Even the influential nobles of Horia had not been exempt from the expulsion. The Sultan is dead. Even more baffling was the death of Nahoma's Sultan Alibur. Alibur's family was among the first to be expelled from the blockaded Horia. His young heir had passed through to a nearby city's warp gate, trembling with fear while holding the Sultan's head. The ruler of the vast desert kingdom was murdered in an instant, and only his head was left to be transported. The heir of Nahoma now sought asylum in Keel and was awaiting a response. Reading the contents of the letter sent from the Keel Palace, Eugene uttered a single word, devil. The heir to the Sultan Albaduk had repeatedly muttered the word, devil, while shivering violently. It was said that the devil suddenly appeared from the sky and tore off the Sultan's head. The devil then whispered to the Sultan's son to embrace the head and flee to Kiel. Is it him? Eugene muttered. He tried to think of any creature worthy of being called the devil. No one else other than the impostor who had attacked Black Lion Castle came to his mind. That was what made it even more perplexing. It was predictable that the impostor would return to Nahama and engage in some plot with Amelia Merwin, but why would the Centipede Mountains be in his possession? The Centipede Mountains were supposed to be locked away by the Demon King of Incarceration in Revesta. Moreover, the problem was that the impostor had more than just the Centipede Mountains. It wasn't possible to see it in the footage because of the Centipede Mountains' concealment, but there were countless monsters inside the barricade. All the citizens who escaped Horia spoke of the same thing. Dark clouds rolled in from the far horizon. The sky darkened as if night had suddenly fallen. The giant centipede encircled the capital, and huge monsters plummeted down from the dark sky. Fortunately, there was some footage of this scene. There was the sound of chaos. The footage reflected someone else's perspective of the scene, and as such it shook quite a bit. But the screams were clearly audible. The giant monsters that fell from the sky crushed dozens of buildings. Many died in the initial crash of the monsters, but fortunately the monsters did not rampage after taking foot. They simply bowed and crouched as if in worship towards the darkening Nahama Palace. This footage was recorded by spies from the intelligence agency planted in Horia. The situation was not yet fully resolved, and as such the available footage was scarce and poor in quality. But more information was expected to arrive from other sources in a few days. There's no need to watch more, Eugene thought with a frown. People of this era were not well versed with demons. They might need more information, but Eugene did not. He knew what these creatures were. They were the same demonic creatures he had seen in the dreams Moore had shown him, the monsters confined in Revesta. It was clear even at a single glance. The impostor had brought all the demonic creatures of Revesta. And it seemed he had brought the demons as well. They were the subjects of destruction led by Alfiro. Eugene did not know what to make of the current situation. The subjects of destruction were following the impostor. Was this according to the intention of the Demon King of Destruction? Or had it been instigated by the Demon King of Incarceration? And what about Vermouth, who was sealing the Demon King of Destruction? Has Helmuth made a statement yet? Eugene asked. It seems they are still silent, Gilead answered with a heavy face. Even with such a significant event unfolding, Helmuth hadn't released a statement. Eugene contemplated deeply about the Demon King of Incarceration. The Demon King of Incarceration was never the one to instigate war first. He was simply waiting for Eugene to ascend Babel. Does this change anything? Eugene wondered aloud. The footage of Horia continued playing in front of him. Eugene swiped his hand as if shooing away a fly, turning off the video. A bastard born from my past body is rampaging on his own. That bastard invaded this castle, then disappeared and is now in Horia, spat Eugene. Everyone's gaze shifted at his words. Eugene suddenly said, I guess there is something that has changed. Seeing the bastard's actions, it appears he's preparing to defend a siege in Horia. His forces seem to be primarily composed of demonic creatures and demon folks rather than Nahama's army. Eugene thought that was very much like Hamel. Most of the conscripted soldiers that Amelia had demanded from the emirs had not made it to Horia as yet. In any case, they were unnecessary and numerous, but it wouldn't feel good to have humans as mere cannon fodder either. What remained of the army inside Horia was expelled beyond the Centipede Mountains as well. Civilians at risk of being caught up in the conflict were also thrown out. The impostor was aiding Hamel. It almost felt like an obsession. The structure of the war itself was being set between demons and humans. With the Sultan dead and his heir seeking asylum in Kiel, the emirs will not likely join the war. They have nothing to gain from it anyway. Well, having the battlefield concentrated in Horia does make things easier. However, in reality it would not be easy. The history of the era of war was a testament to how difficult and horrific it was to cross the Centipede Mountains. Would the demonic creatures from Revesta really just wait inside the Centipede Mountains? It was unlikely. Horia was located in the middle of the desert. Beyond its splendid capital and walls was a barren desert. To strike at Horia, one would have to cross that desert. It was highly likely that the monsters would be encamped in the desert. It's a contradiction. Eugene grimaced in thought. The impostor was aiding Hamel. But if that were truly the case, he could just come and die or merely pretend to wage war. But the impostor. He went to Moulin. He attacked Black Lion Castle. He diligently created a stage for war. Could it be? Eugene's lips twitched at this thought. You of all people want to test me? Did he come to harbor a desire to become the real deal after realizing he was an impostor? Did he want to make some claim on the stage of war after setting it up? Did he, as an impostor, want to argue that he could be real? Or did he perhaps want to prove that his existence had significance? If it were me. Eugene didn't want to think further. It wasn't necessary to harbor any emotions other than anger regarding the impostor. Nothing had changed since their first encounter in the forest. In his own way, the impostor claimed to be real and Eugene would ruthlessly crush him. Sienna. Eugene turned to look at Sienna. I know, Sienna responded with a nod while wiping the dust off her cheek. Although they weren't finished with the cleanup of the forest, given the situation, it could no longer be prioritized. Knowing this, Sienna gauged Ancilla's expression. For now, I'll go straight to Aroth and grab the king by the scruff, said Sienna. Why would you grab him by the scruff? Questioned Eugene. Otherwise he might say no, she answered. Eugene silently eyed Sienna. She cleared her throat and slowly turned her head away, saying, Anyway, I will gather Arotha's elite forces. Of course, I will also summon the archwizards. What about the Black Tower Master? Asked Eugene. Given the opponent, it might be good to have an expert in black magic, Sienna suggested. Aren't you being too kind to the Black Tower Master? Questioned Eugene with narrowed eyes. Sienna harbored a flicker of hope at his gaze. Was he perhaps jealous? Jealous that she was taking another man with her? Don't worry too much. Balzac may be a dark wizard, but well, as a wizard he's quite to my liking, assured Sienna. What if that bastard betrays us? Eugene questioned. Naturally, Eugene wasn't feeling jealous. Instead, he was cautious of Balzac, especially since it seemed like the Demon King of Incarceration had tampered with the Death Knight. You are worrying unnecessarily. Even if by some chance Balzac tries anything, I won't be fooled, assured Sienna. Oh, look at you. What about others? Eugene asked. That too is an unnecessary worry. My magic won't let him slip away even if I take my eyes off Balzac. Besides, I have already gotten an oath from Balzac, Sienna replied confidently. In any case, she had more trust in her absolute magic than the oath she heard from Balzac. If Balzac tries something, well, that's even better. I can just kill him on the spot without waiting for later, said Sienna. Eugene didn't object further. He recognized the effectiveness of Balzac's signature, blind, in large-scale battles, and was also curious about Balzac's new signature, gluttony. Eugene still wasn't sure if Balzac was an enemy or an ally. Even if they were inevitably destined to be adversaries at one point, that time might not have come yet. Balzac had helped Eugene in various ways until now, so Eugene wanted to give him enough leeway before deciding to kill him. I shall head to the royal palace, declared Gilead. I've reported our situation, but Eugene, I will need to communicate your stance as well. Yes. Oh, the Emperor knows I'm Hamel's reincarnation. By chance, if the Emperor's response is unsatisfactory, just ask him if he wants another pummeling by Hamel. Gilead's expression became complicated. The Emperor's attitude towards the Lionheart family had changed noticeably since Eugene's last visit to the royal palace. So that was the reason, Gilead realized. Another pummeling by Hamel? Didn't that imply that the Emperor had already received a pummeling? Well, Gilead tried his best not to dwell on that thought. The restoration of the Black Lion Castle was left to Klein and Carmen, although it was still possible for the soldiers to arm and set out immediately. However, it wasn't feasible to just rush into Horia. The time has come for the dragon lions to step forward, murmured Carmen. The suits of armor crafted from the remains of Rhyzakia were the handiworks of Gundor and the dwarf craftsmen. They still hadn't been distributed to the knightly orders. Carmen fondled the exit inside her uniform. Before transforming, it was thin like underwear. However, the dragon heart at the center of her chest simmered with a rage that burned like lava while remaining cold as ice. Come to think of it, Eugene, I have never shown you my transformation, said Carmen. What? Eugene asked. Transformation. Don't you know what it is? Whispered Carmen. Her eyes sparkled as she approached Eugene. Transformation is just that. Transformation. Just as you wrap yourself in pitch-black flames to become the Black Lion, I don my dragon armor and transform into the Dragon Lion, declared Carmen. What? Eugene was dumbfounded. Is it hard to understand? Indeed, it makes sense that you cannot imagine my transformation. If you wish, I can show it to you right now. Don't worry. Unlike Destiny Breaker, seeing my transformation doesn't mean one of us has to die, continued Carmen. Eugene slowly stepped back while shaking his head. He was utterly perplexed. You know what? Why don't we save that transformation for the war? Suggested Eugene. Of course, but sometimes I need to fine-tune the transformation. The dragon heart of the demonic dragon within me whispers. Carmen said softly. She touched her temple while swaying. Sometimes I hear sinister whispers. The vengeful spirit of the demonic dragon Raizakia tempts me. Slaughter, blood, dreadful urges. Yet I am the silver lion of Lionheart. Even though my blood resonates with the dragon's whispers, my will remains unshaken, she declared. Yes, Eugene said, sounding unsure. But someday if I become weak, these evil desires might overpower me. Even I, the silver lion, could fall into darkness, Carmen continued. Fall into darkness? Asked Eugene. It's when my will succumbs to darkness and corruption. Of course I won't fall easily. But, if I ever become the lion of corruption, Eugene, you must kill me, said Carmen. What nonsense are you? Eugene stopped abruptly. He found multiple points to contest. Firstly, the dragon heart in Carmen's exit was not from Raizakia. In fact, Raizakia's dragon heart had been utterly destroyed by Eugene and no longer existed in this world. While it was true that Raizakia's remains were used to enhance her exit, the material's dark power had been purified by Christina and Anise for nearly half a year. There was no chance for Carmen's claims to be true. It was impossible for Raizakia's vengeful spirits to be lingering. Finally, Eugene responded after a long pause. Yes, I understand. If you fall into corruption. Darkness, Carmen corrected. Yes, if you fall into darkness, I will kill you myself. Eugene decided not to correct her and instead agreed with what she said. Having known Carmen for years, he realized this was precisely what she wanted to hear. Indeed, Carmen seemed satisfied with Eugene's response. She nodded in approval. If you're ever curious about my transformation, feel free to come and find me, said Carmen. Yes. With that, Eugene finally managed to extricate himself from Carmen.